Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The First Lady and the Rebel, a novel by Susan Higginbotham, narrated by Tiffany Morgan. Chapter 1. Mary. October 1839 to November 4th, 1842. The man she intended to marry had yet to learn about their future together, but she had already made up her mind. It was a pity, though, that she had been so bedraggled when they first saw each other shortly after Mary arrived at her married sister Elizabeth's house to pay an extended visit of the sort that was hoped by families to end in matrimony for the unmarried sister, and quite often did. The trip from Mary's home in Lexington, Kentucky, to Elizabeth's in Springfield, Illinois, had taken over 2 weeks and had involved nearly every means of transport known to man: rail, boat, coach, and even a stretch on foot when the coach hit a muddy patch. Mary had arrived at her sister's house tired and out of sorts and eager to take a nap and freshen up. Instead, she had found that Elizabeth, whose house drew anyone of any importance in Springfield, had company: their cousin, John Todd Stewart, and his law partner. So, a roomful of lawyers, who could be either the dullest people in existence or the most fascinating, depending on what they chose to speak about. Hoping for the latter, Mary had repaired her coach-worn appearance as best she could and entered the room. "Cousin!" John Stewart kissed her cheek, then shook hands with her father, who had been her escort on the journey. "We were just leaving, and I'm sure you're glad of it after your long trip. We'll stop by once you're settled in. You didn't meet Mr. Lincoln here on your last visit, did you?" "No," Mary said. She gazed at the stranger in the room, a man of about 30 years of age who somewhat awkwardly extended his hand to her. I would have remembered Mr. Lincoln. He was certainly not a forgettable person. He was tall, well over 6 feet, a trait that Mary, at 5 feet 2, usually found off-putting in a man. With this man, however, she scarcely cared that she had to tip her head up to look at him, for his face, sharp-edged and topped by a thatch of ill-tamed black hair, was well worth the effort. It was not a handsome face by any means, but after years of enduring the good-looking and vacuous young men of Lexington, Mary had concluded long ago that handsomeness was overrated. This man had character in his face, character and intelligence. She had never seen the like, but she could not simply stand there staring at Mr. Lincoln as if she were a practitioner of physiognomy. "I have heard of you, Mr. Lincoln, many times. Weren't you the leader of the effort to get the state capitol moved here?" Ninian Edwards, Mary's brother-in-law, broke in before Mr. Lincoln, who had appeared at a loss for what to do after releasing Mary's hand, could reply. "Miss Todd will talk politics like a man if you allow her." "Why, yes, I will," said Mary. "It is unladylike, I grant you, but if we feel the effects of politics as much, if not more so, than you gentlemen, shall we not be allowed to take an interest in such a weighty subject? But you have not allowed Mr. Lincoln to answer my question, Brother Ninian." "It was the work of many, Miss Todd," Mr. Lincoln said. His voice was not deep, as Mary had expected, but peculiarly high-pitched, though Mary, on reflection, found it not to be displeasing. "But we have to be off, as Mr. Stewart says." "Well," said Mary, "those many should be quite pleased with themselves, for Springfield has improved very much since I was here last. I expect it will be a regular metropolis when I next visit." Mr. Lincoln nodded, then all but fled from the Edwardses' parlor. "You quite overwhelmed the man," her sister Elizabeth said as she showed Mary to her room a little while later. "He scarcely says boo to us women in Springfield who have known him for some time, much less a complete stranger." "I find him fascinating." Mary began to unpack her trunk. In Lexington, a slave would already have accomplished that task, but it was clear that in Springfield she would have to fend for herself. 5, 6 words, and you find him fascinating? "He has a mind, Elizabeth. I can tell that." "Oh, mind," Elizabeth snorted. "Well, he needs that, because he certainly does not have breeding. Did you not see how he was dressed? He must throw his clothes on in the pitch darkness." "I was not looking at his dress. I hope he comes back here soon so I can." "He will. He's here quite often. But if you want to hold a conversation with him, you'll need to be prepared to do the talking yourself, if you're a woman, at least. With the men, he can tell stories and idle time away for hours. But tell me, how is everyone at home?" "Oh, the same. Our stepmother sends us her kindest regards, not to mention her vast relief at having one less stepdaughter to plague her. Anne is trying as ever, although she cheered up marvelously when I left upon finally getting to claim our room as hers. The little ones are driving Mammy Sally to distraction, and the baby is squalling as loud as he ever was. Levi's habits do not improve." Somewhat awkwardly, Mary shook out the gown she had just removed from her trunk. "Oh, and Emily was nearly kidnapped. The mite wandered off, probably as tired of the baby squalling as the rest of us, and a passing couple was so taken with her beauty they took her home and kept her there until their minister happened to come by and impressed upon them that they were doing wrong. She is a lovely little thing." Settling her chemises into a drawer, Mary asked in her most casual tone, "When do you think Mr. Lincoln will call?" "Soon," said Elizabeth firmly. "Now, go lie down. You must be exhausted. Probably Mr. Lincoln won't appear nearly as fascinating to you when you've had some rest." Mary sighed, but did not argue. She looked around the room, which had been occupied by her second oldest sister, Frances, until her marriage just a few months before, and saw that her bed had been turned down, but not with much care. White servants, who she had learned from Elizabeth tended to do exactly as they pleased, would take some getting used to, just like the mud that filled the mostly unpaved streets of Springfield and that had slightly contaminated her dress despite her best efforts. The mattress she sank into was of excellent quality, as was everything in her sister's household. No surprise, since Ninian Edwards was a former governor's son, and his house, perched upon a hill at a slight distance from the heart of the town, was one of the best in Springfield. From her father, however, who told her everything, Mary had learned that all was not well with her brother-in-law, who was finding it hard to pay some of his bills. But the entire country had been in the doldrums due to the bank panic of 2 years before. Now that Springfield was the new capital, thanks in large part to this Mr. Lincoln, perhaps things would turn around for her brother-in-law. Her last visit to Springfield had been a short one, and had served its purpose well of allowing Mary to get a respite from a house full of half-siblings, all of whom had inherited the Todd temper in varying degrees, and her stepmother. Not that Mary was completely unsympathetic to Mrs. Todd, saddled with the task of raising the children from her husband's first marriage while bearing her own children at almost mechanical intervals. This visit was different. With Frances married, it was time for Mary, the next sister in line, to do the same, especially as she was nearly 21, by no means at the age where society would declare her doomed to spinsterhood, but still at a point of life where she had to be thinking of her prospects. She had utter confidence that she would find a husband, although it was true that suitors had not exactly been lining up by her father's study in Lexington. Mary had never given any of the men there a thought, much less any encouragement. She considered them shallow. No doubt they believed her to be peculiar, with her habit of saying what she thought and her unladylike interest in politics. But what did it matter? Springfield, small but pushing, was where her future lay. In Lexington, men lounged. In Springfield, they strove. Those were the sort of men that caught her fancy. And none of them, she suspected, strove as much as Mr. Lincoln. It was foolish for her to think, on such short acquaintance, that he was the husband for her. But while she didn't know him, she did know of him. She knew that her cousin, a fine lawyer, had taken him on as a junior partner, which he would hardly do if the man didn't have promise. She knew that Mr. Lincoln had led the group of legislators who had battled to move the Illinois capital to Springfield, no mean undertaking considering how unpromising the city had looked just a couple of years ago. Even today, as Mary's stagecoach had pulled up alongside the new American House Hotel, a contingent of hogs had been near the door to greet the passengers. And while he might not have breeding, the fact that he was received in her brother-in-law's parlor showed that he had other qualities, for Ninian Edwards would not let just anyone into his fine house, and it had taken something to get in the legislature in the first place. What might such a man accomplish with her as a wife? Mary settled to sleep, smiling at the possibilities. But Mr. Lincoln did not come to the Edwards house the next day, nor the day afterward. Mary asked her sister and brother-in-law about him only once or twice, so not as to seem overly interested, but they could say little except that he was a busy man who did not socialize much in the evenings. She had plenty of time anyway, Mary thought. No point of rushing into these things. In the meantime, she visited her sister Frances, now Mrs. Wallace, who was boarding with her husband in the Globe Tavern. $4 a week bought the newlyweds a room, with meals included, and the cacophony of coaches coming and going. "Granted, it's not what I was accustomed to," Frances said, waving Mary to a seat in the corner that served as the couple's sitting room. "But it's better than I expected. I was in tears when Dr. Wallace told me we would be living in a boarding house." "I can see why," Mary admitted. The room was clean, with all the requisite furnishings, and Frances had been in it long enough to add some of her own touches. But the comforts that Mary and her sisters were accustomed to from their home in Lexington and their sister Elizabeth's home, a floor gleaming with polish, silver on the sideboards, servants within call, were missing. "Still, at least you don't have to cook or clean." Frances leaned forward. "Actually," she said in a low voice, "I do help out occasionally. There are so few women here at the moment, and I would be frightfully bored when Dr. Wallace is gone if I do not." "Goodness," Mary said. She was an expert seamstress, having decided some years ago to acquire the art of fine sewing rather than to trust others to emulate the fashion plates she so admired. But cooking and cleaning were tasks that she was quite happy to leave to the servants, white or black. She repressed a shudder. She had evidently not repressed it well enough, though, for Frances said, "Sister, if you marry a man like that Mr. Lincoln, you may find yourself doing such tasks." "Who said that I planned to marry him?" "Well, Elizabeth said you were interested, and you do have a way of getting what you set your mind on." "Fair enough, but I've only seen him once, and for all I know, he may not improve upon acquaintance." "He's agreeable enough," Frances said, almost coquettishly. "Why, do you know him?" Mary's eyes widened. "He did not court you, did he?" "No. Mr. Edwards spoke of him so much, I asked him to invite him over, and we walked out together once or twice. He appeared to enjoy my company, but he put forth no effort in putting our acquaintance on a higher level. And when Dr. Wallace took an interest in me, that was that." Mary nodded, concealing her inward sigh of relief. It would not have done to be the second Todd sister of choice. In December, the legislature met in Springfield for the first time, its members traveling by coach because the railway had not yet come to town, and meeting wherever a body of men could squeeze in because the Capitol building had yet to be completed. The pigs were no less intrusive, but they had to share the muddy streets now with the state's politicians. The legislatures filled the American House, spilling over to the parlors of the Globe Tavern, where Frances found her slumbers sometimes being interrupted by the sound of brawling politicians. With the legislature had come the rain, which for days upon end alternated between downpours and drizzles, occasionally mixing with a few bedraggled snowflakes. Because venturing upon the streets would have been the ruination of their gowns and slippers, those ladies who could afford to stay inside did so, sending their servants to do their marketing. Mary could not have endured this had she not found a new friend, Mercy Levering, who had come from Baltimore to stay with her brother, Larayson Levering, who lived next door to the Edwardses. Mary took to Mercy instantly. The young women were of an age. Both were from more established cities than Springfield, although Mary had to cede Baltimore's superiority to Lexington in that respect, and both were from aristocratic families. Even better, Mercy had quickly acquired a suitor, a lawyer named James Conkling, and could safely appreciate Mr. Lincoln's virtues without aspiring to him herself. But even Mercy's company had begun to pale after a week of rain, and Mary was itching to get back to town. That was when Mary, having dashed from her house to Mercy's, spied a pile of shingles on the porch, left there, she supposed, by some workman. "Mercy, I have an idea. Remember how Sir Walter Raleigh spread his cloak for the Queen to cross over? Well, we haven't a knight, more's the pity, but we do have our own frontier way of managing." "Whatever do you mean?" Mary held up a shingle. She tossed it in front of her, then stepped primly onto it. "See? We'll throw the shingles down before us, and our feet will never touch the muck." "You can't be serious." "I most assuredly am. Can you seriously bear one more day cooped up inside?" Mary nodded in the direction of the pianoforte. "You can buy some more music," she said coaxingly. Mercy sighed, but she had been bemoaning the lack of new music just the day before. "Oh, I suppose, but if we catch a chill and die, I'll never forgive you." They grabbed a pile of shingles and set off on the short walk to town, Mary's face alight with adventure, Mercy straggling along as if being led to slaughter. For 2 or 3 blocks the scheme worked well enough, but by the 4th block the shingles were as muddy as the streets themselves, and more than one citizen leaned out of his or her window to stare at the spectacle of the 2 finely dressed young ladies hopping from one shingle to another. When they finally reached civilization, Monroe Street with its sidewalk and shops, they tossed their filthy shingles aside and rushed into a bookstore where Mary bought the latest novel and Mercy the latest song. By the time they exhausted the shops an hour or so later, a drizzle was replenishing the mud and the air had a chill. "I've had enough adventure for one day," Mercy said firmly as they left. "No more shingles. We can find my brother or Mr. Edwards to give us a ride home in his carriage." "Or Mr. Conkling, but we'll have to wait until they leave their offices." "That can't be helped." "Wait!" Mary waved to a passing drayman. "Here's a way to get home." "Mary, are you mad?" "No, I'm cold and tired and want to get to the warmth of my parlor. Mr. Hart," she smiled at the drayman, who tipped his hat, "will be delighted to be of service to us, won't you, dear sir?" "Most certainly, Miss Todd." Mercy picked up her skirts and fled. "I'll stop by tomorrow," she called. "My brother would be furious if I got into that thing." "What a rude word for such a fine dray," Mary said as Mr. Hart helped her as best he could into the vehicle. "Shall we be off, sir?" A collection of boys were gaping at her, and she majestically waved her hand as she fancied Queen Victoria must. "To home!" With a lurch that nearly sent her sprawling into the mud, Mr. Hart obliged. Capital city or not, Springfield was still a small, tittle-tattle town, even more so now that the legislators were here to add to the goings-on. So Mary was not entirely surprised to hear on Tuesday, a dry day with a strong wind, all the better to drive gossip from house to house, that her adventure on the dray was known to all and sundry, to the amusement of all, except for Elizabeth, whose steely silence indicated that she was in complete possession of the details. "I didn't tell a soul," Mercy protested when Mary came over that afternoon. "I wouldn't have needed to, though. Such a spectacle needed no help from me, and if there's a soul who doesn't know about it, the cotillion will remedy that." "Cotillion?" "Oh, yes. Some gentlemen are organizing a ball, as it's been so dreary, and the men are in need of civilizing. Why, Mr. Edwards is on the committee. Your sister said nothing to you?" "Not a thing." "Dear, you had best sweeten her up, then." Mercy could not help but smirk. especially since your Mr. Lincoln will be there, or I assume he will, as he is on the committee as well." "He will?" Mary rose. "I must get a new gown." "Oh, I wouldn't bother. They say he never notices what women wear. But," Mercy snickered, "you might capture his attention if you arrive in your dray." Mary arrived at the American house on the day of the cotillion not in a dray, but in her brother-in-law's carriage. As the ladies in their finery hurried into the suite that had been converted into a dressing-room for the occasion, Mary watched with amusement as the younger matrons, who had entered clutching squirming bundles to their chests, briskly nursed the contents of the bundles before they handed them off to the girls who had been hired to watch them for the evening. "Don't mix them up," they called as the girls spread out a line of sleeping babies on the bed. It would be pleasant to be married, but there was no need to rush into anything, she decided as she pinched some color into her cheeks. Goodness knew there were enough children back in her father's house in Lexington to look after if she were so minded. Following her sister into the ballroom, meekly, for Elizabeth was still silently indignant about the dray incident, Mary admired the room, ablaze with candles and decked with greenery as a herald of the Christmas season. Standing by the doorway were the men who had organized the cotillion. Though Ninian and some of the others were tall men, one none the less towered over them, Mr. Lincoln. In his black suit, he was nattier than he had been when Mary had last met him. As did the other men, he greeted the ladies in turn as they filed into the room. Then he saw Mary. His face twisted into a grin, he slapped his knee, and he began to laugh so hard he wheezed. "Dray?" he finally managed. "A dray. There's Miss Todd, the girl who rode in a dray." "Yes," Elizabeth said freezingly. "That is my sister, who rode in a dray. Come along, Mary." But Mr. Lincoln would have none of it. He straightened up and wiped his eyes. "Funniest thing I ever saw," he gasped. There I was, making some notes at my desk, and who should I see coming down the street but Miss Mary Todd in all her fine feathers, riding in that dray. I tell you, it made my day, Miss Todd, made my week, made my month, the finest sight I've ever seen in Springfield. Miss Todd, I want to dance with you in the worst way. Will you oblige?" Unable to muster a reply, Mary handed him her dance card, and Mr. Lincoln neatly inscribed it, "First on the list. I can't wait, Miss Todd." He did indeed, as Mary was fond of telling others in years to come, dance with her in the worst way. Mary had danced with awkward men and boys before, especially at Madame Mentil's school, where as a boarder she had helped her teacher's sons learn the Terpsichorean art, but she could not keep her slippers clear of Mr. Lincoln's enormous feet. This was so even though Mr. Lincoln was more focused on his feet than on Mary, who wondered wistfully if he even noticed her new gown, sprigged with blue flowers that matched her eyes, or the very becoming arrangement of her thick, dark hair. Though she had had little patience when the swains of Lexington paid her their empty, trite compliments, she would not have taken such pretty phrases amiss coming from Mr. Lincoln. But even if Mr. Lincoln was inclined to give her such tributes, they had had no chance for conversation, because even if the dance had lent itself to it, talking and dancing simultaneously was completely beyond her partner's powers. So she had to settle for the pleasant sensation of his large hand clasping hers as she twirled around whenever her partner remembered to let her do so. Mr. Lincoln seemed pleased enough with his performance, however. After all, Mary was still standing and had all 10 toes intact, and managed a gallant bow as the number ended. He would have lingered by Mary's side to talk after she limped off the dance floor, but Mary, knowing the proprieties of such matters, and finding that Elizabeth had only just begun to thaw after the dray incident, gently reminded him that she was engaged for the next dance, and several thereafter. Yet when she was claimed by her next partner, Mr. Stephen Douglas, who danced so well that Mary scarcely noticed his almost comically small stature, Mary found herself looking around the room for Mr. Lincoln. It was almost worth hazarding her slippers once more. Though Mr. Lincoln had not paid much attention to her gown, which so enticingly displayed her shoulders and a hint of bosom, the other bachelors in the room apparently did, so Mary was engaged for the entire evening. As this was her first ball in Springfield, normally she would have been gratified by this, but her mind was on Mr. Lincoln, and, when she could manage it discreetly, her eyes as well. She was able to learn through her observations that he did not drink, though he made no point of his abstemiousness, but stood laughing amid his companions, some of whom had clearly overindulged in spirits. This pleased Mary. Though no Kentucky girl expected men to avoid liquor entirely, she disliked drunkenness. If she shared any trait of her stepmother's, it was the way they both watched her brother Levi anxiously at gatherings, counting his drinks and praying that he would not pass beyond the stage of amiable intoxication. Mr. Lincoln was not dressed badly, although his sleeves and pantaloons were a bit too short, and there was nothing in the cut of his garment to recommend his tailor. What a proper wife could do for him in that regard! Elizabeth glided behind her, nearly causing her to drop the cup of punch she held. "Do stop staring at Mr. Lincoln," she hissed in French, continuing a habit the sisters had found useful on a number of occasions. "If it makes you feel better, though, he has asked to call tomorrow, and I have granted his wish. You may gaze at him all you like then." Mr. Lincoln bounded into the parlor the next afternoon, on time, and not showing any signs of fatigue or dissipation, although the cotillion had still been going on when Mary and the Edwardses had left in the small hours. When he had taken his seat on a horsehair sofa beside Mary, she said, "Now, Mr. Lincoln, you really must tell me all the ins and outs of how you moved the legislature to Springfield. There is ample time for it today, and I insist." "I will obey, Miss Todd, but tell me, what got you interested in politics?" "Goodness, Mr. Lincoln, I hardly know. It almost seems as if I have always been. But if I had to assign a cause, and if you ask, I must—" Mary smiled in a manner she knew would show a dimple. "My mother died when I was quite young, and I felt the loss very keenly. You know how a parent wishes to indulge a child in such a situation." "Well, no," Mr. Lincoln said dryly. "A girl child, then, Mr. Lincoln. In any case, I liked to sit with my father when he was at home, and he would allow me to remain in the room for an hour or two while he talked to his friends, on the condition that I remained absolutely quiet. Naturally, their conversations would turn to politics, and as I could do nothing but listen, I did, and learned a great deal. And what great men I had to learn from, Henry Clay among them." "Henry Clay? Why, he is my hero, Miss Todd, and you know him." "Indeed she does," Elizabeth, who had been knitting on the matching sofa across the room, put in. "Why, she made a perfect nuisance of herself one day at his house." "I did not. He was charmed." Mary glared at her sister, then turned to Mr. Lincoln. "When I was quite a young thing, you see, I took it in my head to ride my new pony to Ashland, his estate, and show it to him. Who in the county was a better judge of horseflesh? Well, he was entertaining some gentlemen, but being the soul of courtesy, he kindly invited me in, and I had a simply delightful time listening to them. When there was an opening in the conversation, I did not interrupt Elizabeth, as everyone insists. I told Mr. Clay that my father thought he, Mr. Clay that is, would some day be the president, and that I would dearly like to live in the White House myself." "I wonder what Mrs. Clay thought of that, sister." "Goodness, I wasn't proposing to marry Mr. Clay. That would be shocking. I was merely stating a fact. In any case, Mr. Clay assured me that if he were ever president, I would be one of his first guests, and as far as I know, the invitation still stands, so I took it downright personally when he lost the nomination this year." As Mary and Mr. Lincoln began bewailing Mr. Clay's loss, Elizabeth yawned once, then twice, and soon found an excuse to slip out of the room, leaving the pair to move to the subject of the relocation of the capital and, gradually, an inch or two closer together. They were still chattering away, or, to be precise, Mary...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?